We see a lot of live action comic book films these days, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a growing genre of adaptation that continues to dominate the box office and has given us some of the best on-screen performances and cinematic moments in recent years. But though the critical triumphs of Marvel's Avengers franchise or Amazon Prime's The Boys have recently proven that comic books can be adapted to be just as authentic and visceral on screen, the question stands, why have there been so many bad ones?
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
In his chapter Incompatible Visual Ontologies, the problematic adaptation of drawn images, graphic novel theorist Pascal Lefebvre argues there are 4 issues that have continuously jeopardized the successful remediation of comic books into cinema. Number 1, the artistic dilemmas of translating comic drawings to film photography. 2, the unique characteristics of page layout compared to the moving screen. 3, the deletion and addition process that occurs with rewriting comic texts as screenplays. And 4, the importance of sound in film compared to the silence of comics. These challenges concern both narrative and visual dilemmas due to comic books existing as a multi-track medium. In turn, this burdens the filmmaker with an increased pressure of fidelity, more so than in the adaptation process of single-track mediums, such as literature, which only need to be faithful to the written prose. While Marvel and DC have proved this is no longer an issue for them, one film which pioneered a new wave of comic book adaptations to overcome Lefebvre's 4 dilemmas arrived in the unlikely form of Robert Rodriguez's 2005 feature, Sin City, from Dark Horse Comics. A problem which many comic book films share is a challenge to replicate the visual ontology of unrealistic comic drawing into film photography. Where some filmmakers have prioritized real actors and practical effects, they sacrifice the unique graphic aesthetic of the original comic book. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is a great example of this. More frequently though, filmmakers are attempting to recreate the graphic feel of comics by simultaneously using live action and digital effects together. However, the technology was still underdeveloped at the time, and these were expensive, high-risk endeavours. Lefebvre notes the reception of the CGI in early trailers for Hulk in 2003 as too cheesy, affecting the film's reputation significantly. Though Sin City uses CGI alike to Hulk's, Opfer notes that Rodriguez's digital effects are deployed to achieve artistic fidelity to the comic drawings, rather than force an ambitious attempt of realism. This provides a great faithfulness to the film's final cut, and also makes for some striking and unique cinematography. We can see the comparisons in many of the wide shots for the hard goodbye narrative in the film, as Marv, played by Mickey Rourke, drives off a pier to escape the police. This bold adaptive decision successfully translated unique graphic imagery for film in a manner that was rarely seen in the genre at the time. While this proved to be a hit with fans, some critics swayed against it, as Welk describes the remediation as excruciatingly faithful, contending that the film fails to develop on anything that the comic book format doesn't already offer. Bold argues that by recreating Miller's simple illustrations, the medium draws attention to, rather than effaces, itself. Technology is also utilised in the film to adapt the visual aesthetic of Sin City through the use of colour, or more aptly, the lack of. At their core, Miller's Sin City series are neo-noir comics, heavily reliant on ambiguity and sinister dark themes, both visually and narratively. In his preface to How to Draw Noir Comics, illustrator Sean Martinborough defines the word noir as simply celebrating the colour black, not confined to a specific genre. In consequence, Miller's illustrations in the Sin City comics offer very restricted colour variations, even abandoning grayscale completely. As Welk argues, this ultimately has a negative effect. He writes his drawing is violently powerful, solid, passionate, but there is also something off-putting about the whole affair, which is that the same stark black and white contrast extends to everything in the Sin City books. In Rodriguez's adaptation, however, intense black and white film is incorporated with occasional splashes of isolated colour. This allows the film to uphold an air of fidelity to its noir origins, whilst avoiding a fully monochrome experience like the comics, and provide associations with real life for the viewer. The use of digital cameras is essential for both these effects. In an interview with Wired in 2005, Rodriguez explains this movie wouldn't even be possible if I shot it on film, when discussing how difficult it is to capture pure black and white on industry-standard cameras. Moreover, as Wagner describes, the possibility to add or subtract colour via digital editing was a relatively new technology in the filmmaker's visionary toolbox, allowing for more autonomy and technical capabilities of telling a story in multiple ways. For example, the first use of colour in Sin City is deployed to foreshadow narrative in The Customer is Always Right. Here, an unnamed woman walks into frame wearing red lipstick and a red dazzling dress. Shortly after, the woman is killed by an assassin who holds her as she dies. Thus, the audience immediately acknowledge the red colouring to symbolise the blood that has not been coloured. Later on, in the film's adaptation of That Yellow Bastard, Rodriguez uses colour to visualise characters' emotions and point of view. Here, as Hartigan is reunited with Nancy, warm orange hues surround her as she dances, but when Hartigan soon realises that she is in danger, the colour quickly drains out to stark white and black. While other noir adaptations such as Road to Perdition and Atomic Blonde disregard their noir-coloured origins and appropriate realistic colour schemes for the films, Sin City effectively uses colour technology to complement its narrative qualities and provide a memorable viewing experience. Lefebvre's secondary issue concerns the unique nature of static comic panels as opposed to the always moving film screen. He states, "The interplay of the various panels, their relative dimensions and their location, is a constitutive aspect of the comic medium. Cinema, with its moving images and standardized screen formats, is not well equipped to imitate the page layouts of comics." DC's 2004 adaptation of Catwoman famously struggled with this. However, with Rodriguez's experience in using low-budget digital backlots for the majority of his films, Sin City seamlessly transitions between the gaps of the comic panels by using dynamic, fluid cinematography as well as computer imagery. Here, in the film's opening sequence, the shot and reverse shot of the assassin kissing his victim switches to a profile white and black silhouette 2-shot, replicating an exact panel from The Customer is Always Right. Bold notes that this distinct comic book moment is followed by a crane shot that only CGI could achieve, as a virtual camera rises up from the roof terrace, spiralling around skyscrapers and up into the sky to look down on the vast basin city, whose contours spell out Sin City. Whilst this stylistically and faithfully leads us into the title sequence, Bolter and Grierson discuss that in such instances, Sin City almost becomes conflicted with trying to erase its new medium, that the audience soon stand in the same relationship to the content as they would confronting the comic, though it can similarly be argued that these instances of cross-medium confrontation are the very experiences Rodriguez is trying to create. Lefebvre's two final dilemmas concern the narrative issues of comic adaptation, both of which Rodriguez overcomes with a careful placement of diegetic and non-diegetic sounds. A principal narrative tool used in many comics, as well as Miller's, are the inclusion of written sound effects and speech bubbles. However, where written dialogue in comics can be adapted as speech and voiceovers in film, written sounds cannot be as simply recreated. Pratt argues that in comic books, when there are sound effects, characters can hear them, though the sounds heard within the diegesis may not be exactly the same as the sounds depicted in words. For instance, kablamo may be onomatopoeic, however, it cannot capture the exact sound of an explosion. Sin City overcomes this by translating Miller's more obscure sound effects and adapting them to more realistic noises, such as grunts and window smashes, instead of knocking them out completely. Moreover, the adaptation pays attention to the ways in which written sound effects operate differently in their panels. For instance, in Miller's The Hard Goodbye, Marv and Lucille find themselves locked in the basement of serial killer Kevin. As Lucille lets out a scream of anguish from below, the lettering trails up through the drain and can be heard above by Kevin on a different panel. Recreating the same scene in the film, Lucille's scream from the basement is echoed through to the next shots of Kevin, achieved by editing the sound digitally in post-production. Rodriguez further adapts noises from Miller's comics as metadiegetic sounds into the film, a cinematic tool Gorman defines as being used to convey noises imagined or perhaps hallucinated by a character, and which helps to construct the character's own reality within the diegesis. Here, for instance, in the film's adaptation of The Big Fat Kill, the protagonist Dwight submerges Jack's head in a toilet bowl during a fight scene, while in the comic book the reader is presented with an awkward, illiterate sound effect. Rodriguez adapts it into a muffled and distorted scream as we see Jack's face underwater, giving the audience a surreal illusion of drowning. In both of these instances in Sin City, sound editing has been used creatively to bring the written sound effects of the comics to life. Film soundtracks are another way in which sound technology can be used in the adaptation process to build on the written and illustrated qualities of the comic book medium. Though Robert Stamm argues adaptations should deprive themselves of music as an expressive resource, as novels do not contain soundtracks, it is important to acknowledge that unlike novels which may feature an extensive literary soundtrack, such as Fitzgerald's Great Gatsby, noir comics rarely do. In consequence, if Miller's Sin City were remediated for film with complete literal fidelity and had no soundtrack, the adaptation would lose much of the noir atmosphere Rodriguez had elsewhere created in the film. Discussing the importance of sound in noir film, Ness explains that just as cinematography helped to generate a visual sense of insecurity and paranoia in the genre, the transition towards a more serious tone in noir soundtracks significantly helped to create a darker, more threatening atmosphere. Co-writing Sin City's score himself, Rodriguez's soundtrack is uniquely entirely instrumental. This deliberately heightens the intensity and pace of Miller's narratives, without drawing attention to itself as an expressive resource. In That Yellow Bastard, for example, Hartigan's final voiceover is accompanied by dramatic strings in the background before falling silent as he draws a gun to his head and shoots himself.
An old man dies. A young woman lives. Fair trade.
So, to conclude, although comic book films are entertaining, they often fail to remain artistically and narratively faithful to their origins. And as Lefebvre's dilemmas have proven, it takes a concerted effort, be it through image, colour, cinematography, sound effects or film score, to overcome them. But on a more intrinsic level, Sin City also shows us what happens receptively when movie magic can remediate comic books with an uncanny likeness, a notion consistently demanded by fans and critics alike that, in reality, walks a fine line between loyalty and tedious replication. Whichever side you stand on, Sin City remains as an important testament to the power of fidelity in comic book adaptation, a truly double-edged sword.